Okay, so we know that there's a letter V in have, but what happens to it when I say, I have to go now? Where did the V go? Why did it disappear? Let's talk about it today on the accent journey. Welcome back to the Accent Journey, the podcast for non-native speakers of American English who want to sound clearer, more confident, and more natural when they speak. I'm Steve Nelson, an accent coach with accentfirst.com. Have you ever noticed that sometimes native speakers seem to change the sounds of words when they speak naturally? Maybe you've learned the phrase supposed to, but when you hear an American say it, it sounds more like supposed to. Or perhaps you've learned have to, as we said in the intro, but what you actually hear sounds more like haf-ta. What's going on? Are native speakers making mistakes or speaking incorrectly? No, they're using a completely normal feature of connected speech called assimilation. And today we're going to look at a few examples of this phenomenon in American English. We'll see how sounds can influence one another when they're next to each other, and we'll practice some of these patterns together. Let's get started. All right, this is going to be part one of 2 episodes of assimilation here on the accent journey. And let's start with a simple definition. What is assimilation? Assimilation happens when one sound changes because of a neighboring sound. When we speak, our mouths are constantly moving from one sound to the next. We don't pronounce every word as a completely separate unit. Instead, our tongue, lips, and vocal cords are constantly preparing for the next sound. Sometimes the most efficient way to move from one sound to another is to change the first sound slightly. That's assimilation. You can think of it as your mouth taking a shortcut. And this happens in every language, not just English. Let's highlight some examples. So in the phrase supposed to, if we pronounced every sound carefully, we would say supposed to. The final sound of supposed is a d, and the next word begins with a t. Both d and t are made in almost exactly the same place. The difference is that d is voiced, while t is voiceless, meaning for d we use vocal cord vibration, as we've talked about in a previous episode, while for t we don't use vocal cord vibration. Because the t comes immediately after the d often disappears into the t. Okay? So instead of supposed to, you might hear something much closer to supposed to. So compare the two. I'm supposed to call her. I'm supposed to call her. Or we're supposed to meet at 6. We're supposed to meet at 6. The second one in each of those examples is more likely to be natural to native English speakers. And it isn't something you necessarily need to force. It's just something you should recognize and eventually be able to produce naturally. We see essentially the same thing with used to. Careful pronunciation might sound like used to, but in everyday speech, again, the d often merges with the following t. So used to can sound like yoos-ta. I used to live in Chicago. That's careful speech. I used to live in Chicago. Here's another. She used to work there. She used to work there. And we used to go there every summer. We used to go there every summer. This pronunciation is extremely common in conversational American English. Now let's look at one more example. Have to. The careful pronunciation contains a v, have. But the next sound is a t. Remember, as before, v is voiced and t is voiceless. So when the v comes immediately before the voiceless t, it can become voiceless itself. The v becomes a voiceless f, which is the same sound, just with no vocal cord vibration. So have to becomes haf-ta. Let's compare. I have to leave. I have to leave. We have to talk. We have to talk. You have to see this. You have to see this. In each of these, the second example is more natural. And for all three of these, this is an example of devoicing. So we assimilate the sound and we devoice it. The v changes because it's next to the voiceless t. In each of these, we have devoiced the first sound and assimilated it with the second sound. Okay, here's one more example of a final voiced consonant followed by t. Consider has to. Careful pronunciation is has to. But natural conversational speech often sounds more like has-ta. The z, the voiced z, becomes voiceless before the t. So instead of she has to work tomorrow, we would usually say she has to work tomorrow. Instead of she has to leave early, we more commonly say she has to leave early. Notice that this is very similar with what happened to have to. And the other examples, the voicing changes because of the following voiceless consonant. Okay, but there's something important to remember here. These connected speech patterns aren't necessarily appropriate in every situation. If you're giving a formal presentation or speaking very carefully, you might pronounce these words more fully. But in everyday conversation, natural assimilation is extremely common. So don't think I have to pronounce every letter clearly because that's more correct. Instead, think, how would a native speaker naturally move from this sound to the next? All right, let's do some practice. Repeat after me. I'm supposed to call her. I used to live there. She has to leave early. I have to finish this. Again, don't try to pronounce the words unnaturally fast. Focus on letting neighboring sounds influence one another. Now let's practice some short conversations. Repeat both roles. Dialogue 1. Are you supposed to be here? Yes, I'm supposed to meet my manager. Dialogue 2. Do you still live in Chicago? No, I used to live there, though. Dialogue 3. Do you have to work tomorrow? Yeah, I have to be there early. Now let's finish with a longer passage. First, I'll read it slowly, then again a bit more naturally. I used to work in an office downtown, but now I work from home most of the time. I'm supposed to have a meeting tomorrow morning, so I have to get up early. My manager said I should call him if I have any questions, and I think I'll probably do that tonight. As my manager, he has to help me if I ever need it. I used to work at an office downtown, but now I work from home most of the time. I'm supposed to have a meeting tomorrow morning, so I have to get up early. My manager said I should call him if I have any questions, and I think I'll probably do that tonight. As my manager, he has to help me if I ever need it. The text for this passage will be available on our website at accentfirst.com/podcast or in the show notes for this lesson. As you shadow this passage, listen for used to, supposed to, have to, has to. And don't try to pronounce every sound separately. Let the words connect naturally. All right, let's review today's main ideas. First, sounds influence neighboring sounds in connected speech. Second, voiced sounds can become voiceless before voiceless consonants. For example, supposed to, have to, has to, used to. And third, native pronunciation isn't about carefully pronouncing every letter. It's about moving efficiently and naturally from one sound to the next. If you remember one thing from today's episode, remember this. Words aren't pronounced in isolation, but can change when they meet. This week, listen to an American podcast, TV show, or movie. Listen for 5 examples of connected speech where you hear sounds changing or blending. Write down what you think the speaker said, what the individual words would look like in careful pronunciation, and what actually happened to the sounds. Then replay each example and shadow it. Try to imitate the speaker, not just the individual words, but the way the sounds move together. Thanks for joining me on another episode of The Accent Journey. This podcast is brought to you by Accent First Speech Communication Services and is hosted by me, Steve Nelson. Drop us a line at info@accentfirst.com, and don't forget to subscribe on whatever podcast player that you listen to this on. Leave a review and a comment if you're watching on YouTube. Our music is Hypnosis by Vendredi. Until next time, keep listening, keep practicing, and remember, natural speech isn't about saying every sound separately. It's about making the sounds work together.